Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Bob. Welcome back to Elephants of Plenty, and I got a message for you today. I want to talk to you today about what's that saying, FDR. He was in the news recently, but he had this great saying, and it's there's nothing to fear but fear itself. When America was at a low ebb in a dramatic situation, being struck by Japanese at Pearl Harbor and about to enter World War II. Well, FDR actually was in the news today with AOC misquoting him or misquoting the Democratic Party, and as far as I guess. It's funny because I was under the same impression AOC was. To be honest, I'll give her a break on this, but in reality, it was after FDR died that they limited the terms, and it was a Republican Congress, I guess, that did it. But I guess that's neither here nor there. What I wanted to talk to you today about is what FDR said, though. The word fear. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. Now, that was a brave statement. That was a brilliant statement. I don't know if he came up with it himself. I don't know where he came, but it was very good. But there's a little bit more that needs to be said. It's a subject really people don't talk about, fear. Having fear. Is it good to have fear? So FDR is basically saying we shouldn't be afraid. Don't be afraid. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? I guess that's the question. Courage is a great thing. Red Badge of Courage. Who wrote that? Stephen Crane, I believe. And then Profiles in Courage, right, by JFK. A book, I don't think I'd be amazed if he actually wrote that. That's a very, very well written book. I recommend that book to anybody. But it was written by definitely a Capital insider. And Kennedy, maybe it might have been his. It really might have been. He had some special insights there, which, he was a very accomplished person. He had tremendous abilities, and he was a great politician he had gifts from God, and he was smart. He was a very smart guy. And but he had some tragic faults that brought him down, but he was an idealist. He definitely wanted to straighten out a lot of things. He wanted to straighten out all the drugs that were coming into America by the mafia, thanks to the CIA. That pissed off the CIA, obviously. So he made, the wrong friends. And then when he brought in his brother to become Attorney General, with eyes on Hoover's position, right, as FBI head, which Hoover had been around a long time. I'm surprised he hadn't retired by then. But so there was definitely, and then you were looking at the prospect of, talking about term limits. Kennedy having 8 years, Robert Kennedy having 8 years, Ted Kennedy having 8 years. So that was 24 years of Kennedys. So the powers that be were threatened. And, kind of like what Hillary says, they're going to throw us all in jail. If Trump got elected, that's what Hillary's now quoted as saying. And they were threatened. And there were a lot of lusts for profits in Indochina. And, actually, I'm reading a great book, and I'm not getting it all from this, but Kennedy and Oswald. Actually, two patriots here. This is the way the book comes off. It's a very good book, Kennedy and Oswald, written by Edward Schwartz, who I believe just passed away, and Judy Very Baker, recommending that book. But I want to talk about fear today. Fear is kind of what we're missing in life. We don't fear God. That's the problem, And the politicians don't fear God. They're allowing babies, if they're born, to die on neglect. And they are all these senators, like 50 of them, 45, I don't know, all these Democratic senators signed off on this. And with no fear of God. That's one of them. I would say that's the number one problem in America today. There's no fear of God. The Bible says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. We all sin. We all have these bodies, and we all sin. I sin, right? And sometimes, I'm bad. But the problem is you can't live your whole life that way. I don't care how much power you'll lose. You just have to trust God at that point. And, the pastors in the church is sold out. I've made that point many times. They're sold out. And we've had 2 or 3 generations of pastors who have been trained not to stand up for God in the pulpit. That's a major problem. And so you got pastors who are huge in leading America into our revolution in the 18th century. And you can read about it. The Book of Light and the Glory talks a lot about it. And that going back to colonial times. I guess it's all colonial times up until the Revolution. But there was 150 years in America before that revolution took place. And there's a lot of good stuff there. The King Philip's War was really interesting. Relationships with Massasoit and his son, they called him King Philip. I should do a video on this. And, when Massasoit passed away, this is like one of my favorite stories of all time. King Philip, took over, and he went into Plymouth, and his name was Metacom. You go down to Rhode Island, Bristol, Rhode Island, that's where Massasoit's chair was, and right on the water there. You can actually go visit there. It's part of a Brown University Heffen-Refer plant. And I wouldn't go alone, bring like 5-6 people with you. Anyway, so Metacom goes up to Plymouth to meet the new generation. And, he has a chip on his shoulder, right? He doesn't want to be pushed around and everything else. And, this is his time. And so he walked around strutting, I guess. I don't know, Bobby Brown or who's a rapper today, I don't know. Like Run DMC from back in the day, And they called him, who does this guy think? They derisively called him King Philip. I don't know, they got the Philip name of maybe, I don't know. I have no idea. But so anyway, the great story I wanted to tell you, though, is tied to Massasoit. When Massasoit was on his deathbed, they had a good relationship with Massasoit. They didn't have a relationship with King Philip, a good one. They never did, because right away there was the King Philip War that took place. And I used to drive a lot all over New England, and I kept seeing this King Philip here, King Philip, various places all over the place. I'm like, who the heck is this guy? Finally, I got the book. Hold on, I'll get it for you. It's called The Mayflower. This is a great book, The Mayflower. It reads very well researched. It's by Nathaniel Philbrick. It was the book of the year, probably says it right on there. one of the 10 best books of the year. New York Times book review. Gives you this great story. See, what happened was Massasoit was dying. He was a long-time sachem, I believe that's the word, of New England, the tribe that they were dealing with. Plus, it was a Massachusetts tribe that they were dealing with too. So they were kind of like sandwiched between all these tribes. And the Pilgrims, they landed in Plymouth, and it was a vacated area because there was a huge plague that wiped out the Indians here. So the Indians were no longer going over there. So luckily the Pilgrims landed there. They land anywhere else, they get killed right away. So anyway, that's not in this book, but that's in The Light and the Glory, which is another book I got. Actually, I just saw another copy of that at the bookstore. I picked it up. Actually, my friend picked it up. So anyway, my story about this isn't fair. I got 3-4 stories to tell here. Let me just get real quick with this one. Massasoit is dying, so they had a good relationship with Massasoit, the Plymouth Pilgrims. So they sent Winslow out to pay last respects, and Winslow is a very educated man, gifted man, on many different levels. He goes out there, and he's halfway there, and he finds out he's dead, that Massasoit said. So he just continues to go out there. He gets out there, Massasoit's on his deathbed, he's still alive, right? So Winslow gives him some herbs. He had some herbs, right? The next day, Massasoit revives and gets up. He's walking around. He can't believe it. He's alive. He was so thrilled. So he tells Winslow that, out of gratitude, that the Massachusetts Indians are plotting to wipe out the Pilgrims as soon as they can, and go back and do something, right? You gotta save. So he goes all the way back to Plymouth, and he tells, the military leader's Miles Standish, little short guy, right? And he's really not even a Christian or anything. He's just there he's a hired gun. And so he's all gung ho. He's ready. He's a little trigger happy, He gets everybody. He's talk about courage, right? No fear. He uses his brain a little bit, and he goes up, to Weymouth. The name section of town. It's where the Great Hill is now. I think they call it, off of Lovell Street, and where the Weymouth Port is, kind of right on the water, right before Fore River, and he announces to the Indians he wants to have a big feast. And they went into somebody's house, one of the locals, and he lured them all in. He had pork, I guess. And he lured in 5 sachems from Massachusetts, in probably various tribes around. And he gets them in that room, gets them in that house, and he kills them all. Right there and then, with their wives' presents. And who knows who else was present, according to this book right here. That's the greatest story in this book. Now, that was the beginning and the end of the Indians. Now, there was a man who was very courageous. That's an example of courageous. And having no fear. But we need to have fear where God comes into play. And God is sovereign over the world, all right? So when we fear God, we don't abort 60 million people in the last 50 years for convenience sake. We teach the Bible. We trust God. Right? Our relationships, our culture is about God. The gospel is preached. every news outlet is into the Bible. Every community is into the Bible. The Congress is representative of Christians. You know, the constitutions of each state used to have a litmus test that said you had to be a Christian. Once we departed from that, you know, it's the rest, as they say, is history, you know. And then we had a Supreme Court in the 60s that was derived of non-jurists, non-legal people, and they voted to take God out of a prayer, school prayer, establish school prayer, take the kids out, don't let the kids, and it was 4 simple areas they wanted to pray about, and since then, the statistics have gone, you know, negatively been influenced, negative correlation. Right at 1962, everything goes the wrong way. So all these social statistics. I got that book around here that talks about that. It's David Barton's book, America to Pray, Not to Pray, Wall Builders. And he uses the government's own statistics, right? But in 54 is when the church sold out, basically. I mean, I don't know how you... They agreed to be quiet. Stop talking politics or anything political, or you're gonna, you know, or you're gonna lose your tax-free status. And that was pushed by Lyndon Baines Johnson. So I'll do a further video about this, the Mayflower story, and there's several other great stories in there. The story of Benjamin Church, who ended up killing his group. A 14-year-old actually ended up killing King Philip, and they got Anawan too. They came right over the rock in Rehoboth, and I went to that rock. You can go to all these sites in Massachusetts. If you're ever up in Massachusetts, that's one of the cool things to do, is to check out all these. This King Philip's Cave, which is in like Norton, and the Rehoboth Rock, where they captured Anawan's Rock, is right in Rehoboth. So that's doable. You can do both of those. You go down to Bristol, and you can see the chair. So there's 3 things you can do in one day. Then you can go back to Plymouth. So that's another way, an interesting take on Plymouth. I mean, and it's all doable in like one day. You do a couple things in the morning, a couple things in the afternoon. I recommend doing that if you want to come up to Boston, and let me know. I'll maybe I can you know, come and check one of the sites out with you. Who knows? But anyway, this guy, I'm gonna do a little profile of this book. This is like the best book I've ever read. One of the best books I've ever read. Top 20 anyway. Top 20 or 30. But he talks so much about, you know, what a great historian. You know, he's written like a dozen great books. And one of them just became a movie, that In the Heart of the Sea. Ron Howard put it to film. And it's about what happens after Moby Dick and the crew of the Essex. And they get stranded out in the middle of the Pacific, and they got to somehow make it back. And they're all from Nantucket, Massachusetts. You know, they were, you know, Nantucket, that was the whaling industry of the world, was right there in Nantucket. And it literally fueled the Industrial Revolution. This is another story. And then this is from the other book, right? And this is great, you know. And they went after the right whale because it was the right whale to kill, to get the oil. That's why it was called the right whale, according to the book, all right? However, Nantucket, you know, these guys were, you know, they were born to sail. No, New England whales, you know, the Boston Bruins never should have ever been called the Bruins. They should have been called the Whalers. I mean, the Whalers, they ruled the seas, and all from Nantucket. And, you know, I remember that hockey team, the New England Whalers, and they did win the championship the second year, and I did go to a lot of their games, and they were a very good team. They ended up becoming the Hartford Whalers. And then, so anyway, long story short, this what was I talking about? Oh, God help me. This book is great. The other book, In the Heart of the Sea. Well, they discovered the sperm whale, and you can get the oil out faster and more cheaper, and it's more plentiful. So they went ballistic going after the sperm whale in Moby Dick, right? And they, in fact, if you go to a lot of the captains' offices, if you will, the Nantucket ended up being shaped like the sperm whale. Can't make this stuff up, but as soon as they discovered oil, where Pennsylvania is, where they discovered oil, and so the party was over for the whalers. All those boats ended up, guess where? I couldn't believe it. San Francisco and the gold rush on those piers, and that's where they all ended up. Oh my goodness, you can't make this stuff up. So anyway, getting back to my main point is, you know, these guys from Nantucket, they were fearless. They were courageous. All right? And actually, it's the other book, but In the Heart of the Sea. But it's Nathaniel Philbrick. And the only people who made it back were from Nantucket, from being 3,000 miles from Chile. All right? And they were... The Essex was, you know, destroyed, and they were like paddling back, basically. Of course, it's gory what happened. I mean, I'll leave that discussion for another time. But they were fearless, and so fearless. I want to try to draw a distinction between being fearless and fearing God. All right. Being fearless is good if you got God on your side. I think that's kind of like, maybe that's what I'm trying to say. You got to be brave. David and Goliath, right? He had God on his side. Right? And that's what the Christian needs to do, and the pastor needs to do, is to be fearless. But have God on your side. So FDR took us halfway, right? He says the only thing to fear is fear itself, but you got to bring God into the equation, right? And we need to fear God as a result, right? And see, nations, as it says in well, David Barton's ministry, America's Godly Heritage, that video, that DVD teaches, and he traces it. You know, he documents everything. In fact, he has the original documents. The guy's amazing. Actually, I spoke to him at Harvard University once. I forgot the question I asked him. I asked him, why did they change the definition of church? And that empowered the government to change what a church meant, and then gave them the ability to regulate it, you know. But fearing God is important, and like I was saying with David Barton, he believed the patriots, the people who founded our nation, the George Washingtons, the Adamses, right? Masons, you know, George Mason, I mean. Franklin, Ben Franklin, you know, supposedly a theist, but he prayed. It wasn't for him praying. The Continental Congress was, you know, the Constitutional Congress there in Philadelphia was totally in chaos, and they were fighting. They were at each other's throats. The next day they had peace. He was 81 years old. And supposedly he's not a believer in God, right? But these people believe, one of the things they believe, this is what I was trying to say, is nations are judged in this life, whereas people the next. So the nations have to be careful. You know, we have the longest running constitution in the world right now, oldest. Yet we're the youngest. We're a younger nation than many. You know, I mean, the Italy's had like 7 constitutions, right? And it's all about balance of powers. and not trusting man, not trusting the government. That's key, because man is fallen. See, we fear God. We know this. This is what the Bible tells us. But the humanists tell us man is basically good, and that we can trust the government. We can trust, these people who talk nice but want to take away freedoms. I mean, I was just talking to somebody about this, and talking about that whole abortion issue, and it was based, Dr. Nathanson basically says that the motive behind them lying to Congress as NARAL to push for Roe v. Wade to suppress the fact that a baby is a fetus. I mean, is a life. Fetus is a life. They suppressed that information. They knew it was true, but they wanted to create a lucrative industry for themselves, right? That's a bad side of capitalism, right? And that's the capitalism side that liberals hate. Yet that's their main currency of power right there, is quote-unquote pro-choice, right? So, it's my point there is that there's no fear of God there, obviously. And that's just, they'll go as far as they can. They'll stoop as low as they can, as long as they can keep their power. And that's what ends up happening. You debase yourself, you defile yourself, and you pretend you put a tie a bow on it and represent it to the world as pro-choice, and that's supposedly the number one thing. I even heard it today. That guy, the guy who ran against Cruz, what's his name? I forget. He's got a weird name. Robert. He pretends he's actually he's actually Irish, but he pretends he's Mexican. Let me just be. Whatever his name is. You know the guy I'm talking about. Beezy Boop. Beto. O'Rourke, oh yeah. O'Rourke. Alright, so that's what I got for you today is, we need to fear God. That's the whole problem, is courage is great, but without God, it's a waste of time. If we don't fear God, we don't have wisdom, we're stupid. And we end up doing dumb things. Plus, we end up in hell when we can end up in heaven. Jesus died on the cross for us. He's forgiven us. He's opened the door to heaven for us. We just got to believe. And that's a supernatural event. We believe in all these other things, right? Why not believe in Jesus? He's the one that's still there. He's there. And today's the day of salvation. That's what the Bible says. So get right with God today. Believe in Jesus. You're set for life. And that's what I got for you today.